Hi everyone, my name is Jolie Shine and I'm a student at Mamaroneck High School. I'm a part of the original Civic and Research and Action program, and I'm working with my fellow classmates on a project about domestic workers, especially nannies and house cleaners. And today in our podcast, we're going to be discussing some of the rights and responsibilities of both the domestic worker and the employer of the domestic worker. We're working to make change in our community, and we're so excited to begin our podcast. Our first episode is going to be discussing documentation status of the worker. Many domestic workers have immigrated to the country, and to their employers, their documentation status is unknown or confusing. In this episode, we're going to discuss documentation status of the domestic worker and how that should impact their relationship. I'm lucky enough to be joined with three amazing guests today, so if you could all introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Maureen Hussein. I'm the legal director of the Worker Justice Center of New York, which is a nonprofit organization. We have an office here in Westchester County, and we represent workers, including domestic workers, in employment matters, such as wage and hour issues, discrimination claims, and labor trafficking.
Mi nombre es Marta Carballo y yo soy una trabajadora doméstica, también nanny training, también soy niñera. Entonces, hago de todo un poco, trabajo del hogar. Sí.
And I'm Bertha Rodriguez. I'm the managing attorney for the Community Justice Program, primarily handling immigration matters, and I'm very glad to be here.
Thank you so much. So, without further ado, how do federal immigration policies affect immigration in domestic work?
So I would say changes to federal immigration policy do not change the rights that workers have, including immigrant workers, under federal labor laws or state labor laws. So that's really important for folks to remember. But at the same time, changes in immigration policy can increase fears that people have, which may result in fewer people speaking up about abuses or labor violations. And in some cases, we have seen unscrupulous employers use a threat of deportation to try to silence employees who've raised complaints or to coerce them to keep working when they would otherwise choose to leave a job and work elsewhere. So that's a concern.
And just to piggyback on that, because of the fear of ICE, a lot of the workers are afraid to exercise any rights that they may have, and sometimes they don't know about their rights. And if they're working in a private home or isolated from other workers, they are not aware of what they can do or what their rights are. So it's easier for them to be exploited. So that's one of the things that we run. So a lot of nonprofit organizations, such as the one that she has, educate the people that we serve. So we can work in conjunction with each other, from the immigration perspective and from the workers' perspective, to be able to help them with whatever immigration benefit they could obtain as a result of whatever exploitation they may be going under.
Ya creo que estando en una cultura diferente, idioma, entonces es un poquito difícil para las trabajadoras también entender el sistema de un país diferente y entender que tenemos derechos, el cual muchas de las trabajadoras no lo saben y piensan que no tienen derechos. Entonces creo que es muy importante que también la comunidad se siga capacitando, tal vez para aprender los derechos que tienen, no importando el estatus migratorio, porque es un gran miedo que la gente tiene, especialmente en esta temporada que estamos viviendo con este cambio de política que estamos viviendo.
So she basically said that also coming from a different culture, not being able to know the rights that that they have, and just the fear that they experience having a different culture, and not being able to exercise their rights from where they come from, and not having the knowledge, and just having to be educated within their communities, and experiencing what's being experiencing during the current administration. That fear also, it's something that pulls them back. Is that good? Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
So about those rights, we're talking about that sometimes the employee doesn't know these rights, but to tell everyone else, what type of impact does someone's immigration status have on the rights that the domestic worker has, if any?
So immigrant workers, including undocumented workers, are entitled to all the protections of the labor laws in terms of minimum wage, overtime compensation, freedom from sexual harassment and other forms of unlawful discrimination, and entitlement to sick leave. Work authorization status is required for someone to collect unemployment benefits, but in terms of the labor protections while someone is working, those operate regardless of immigration status.
Right. I don't have anything else to add to that.
Okay,
That's
yeah.
pretty accurate.
So no matter what their status, they have these rights. And
Yeah.
yeah.
And one thing that we run into is that some of our clients are not paid minimum wage, or they're working a lot more hours and they're not getting paid overtime. So that's one of the things that we run into. And then, usually we give them a referral to make sure that they are aware of what their rights are in regards to labor laws.
And just to piggyback on that, I think a lot of times if a worker raises a complaint, you missed a couple of hours and you didn't pay me for all of my time last week, or, something else that happened that the person wants to raise with the employer, if it's at that moment that the employer is raising a question about immigration status, that raises red flags for us about retaliation, because the laws do operate the same regardless of that immigration status.
Yes.
So the New York state law protects workers against these immigration threats. And so in this relationship that we see between the employee and the employer, especially when the workplace is the employer's home, which really changes a lot of those dynamics, what do you believe that the change on an employer's awareness of the worker's documentation status, how does that affect the relationship?
I wonder if, Marta, if you have any thoughts on that.
En esta parte creo que es muy difícil que nos relacionemos mucho así como un familiar con el empleador. Ellos te quieren hacer sentir como en familia, pero realmente es como un abuso disfrazado, porque primero son 10 minutos que te retienen en casa para trabajar, después son media hora. Entonces, cuando tú tratas de hacer valer tus derechos y los llegas a conocer, es cuando empiezan las represalias, ¿no? De que tú no tienes documentos, tú no estás capacitada, o podemos llamar a migración, o no te puedo pagar más porque tú no tienes un estatus. Entonces, es muy difícil que la gente entienda. Tal vez el empleador también sí conoce los derechos, pero no los quiere llevar a cabo, porque sabe que tiene una persona que no se va a poder defender por el miedo y el temor que tiene.
So in that instance, it makes that person much more vulnerable, because it creates sort of a familiar environment where just the being in a more trusting relationship, sort of as a family, where the person, the employer might start with like, oh, stay 20 minutes more, 30 minutes more, and then starts to take advantage of the situation, and then starts with threats. And then the employee might start to feel fear because of their status. And then it gets to the point where there's that, I guess, power and control over the other person because of the power dynamic, and not being able to do something because of how far it's gotten, and the employer knowing what the the power they have over the employee. So making it more difficult for the employee to assert their rights in that instance.
Is it unlawful for an employer to threaten the legal protections for an undocumented worker in the state?
So I think the answer to that is yes, for a couple of reasons. One is that all of the labor laws, federal and state, have anti-retaliation provisions. So within those laws, there are protections against retaliation, which could include retaliatory immigration enforcement or threats, as well as other forms of retaliation. But also in New York, threatening to call ICE to have someone deported in order to stop them from asserting their rights is actually a crime. So there are a couple of reasons why that should be a no-fly zone for employers.
I think that was super informative. I hope that a lot of people will be able to implicate and understand how documentation status affects, and really understand that no matter the documentation status, everyone is entitled to all of these rights, the paid vacations, the overtime pay, the sick leave, all of that. So, yeah.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is super informative. That was episode 1. That's on documentation status. And stay tuned for our next few episodes with other subtopics of the relationship between the employer and the employee of domestic workers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.